All right, welcome everybody. This Braiding Your River Series Career Development Series has been something we've been talking about for a little while, that we don't really have a whole lot of career development, especially for mid and high level scientists and our support staff. You know, I think that CU does a really fantastic job of providing career development for students and postdocs, but sometimes those of us who are a little further along would still appreciate the chance to connect with our colleagues and think about things to do with our own career. What I would really encourage you to do is reach out to me or any of the series mentoring team and let us know what you would like to have for future workshops. So today we're going to be talking about mentoring undergraduate research. On the next couple of months, I've got a interdisciplinary collaborative team science talk by my colleague John Crockett, who is the Vice President of Research at San Diego State University and a member of a large collaboration around team science in California. And Christine Wiedemeyer is going to give us a talk on building a really meaningful support network in July, but we are totally open to lots of other suggestions for moving it forward into the future. Okay, let's see if I got this right. So yeah, and today we're going to be talking about mentoring undergraduate research. And I would like to just acknowledge that my colleague Val Sloan at NCAR, the CIRES program, and the entire network of geoscientists, REU, PIs, and leaders have contributed content to this presentation in various different forms. I'd like to start by acknowledging my awesome co-presenter here, Dana Stamo. She'll speak to you in a minute, but I'd like to just sort of rave a little bit about what an awesome grad student she was. As a first generation student herself, she and some of her fellow students have created this CU program, STEM Roots, which is a mentoring training program for undergraduates to help them realize the support networks and opportunities that they have on campus, as well as giving them support in navigating the space. I think we all know that there's a lot of unwritten rules in academia, and Dana and her colleagues have gone out and done something about it. And in a minute, I'm going to turn the whole presentation over to her to share what mentoring looks like from a student perspective. But I would encourage you to know about the STEM Roots program in case you have got undergrad students who are here and CU. I'm Beck Batchelor. I think many of you know me. I'm now in CIRES Education Outreach. I work with the REX program. Previously, I was the SOARS program director, so I got to know a lot of the great mentors in CIRES and NOAA through that. I'm also a co-PI of the GEO-REU program, and if you want extra resources on mentoring or setting up any sort of undergrad program, we have a lot of them. I'm also happy to chat with anybody who may down the line want to form or collaborate on REU programs. And I know we've got a brand new one starting up in ATOC this year. Dana, I will turn this piece over to you.
Thank you, Beck. So hi, everyone. I have been working on mentorship for a long time. In STEM Roots as a program, it's basically what we do. We have three main pillars of how we support students. The first of which is workshops. So we just provide, little lectures about what the heck is the GRE and how can I get into a research lab. We offer a community because it's really nice to have a space where you can hang out with people, and that allows for more organic relationships to develop. And then, of course, we provide mentorship. We really want students to feel supported. And because of the types of students that we support, right, those who are first generation, low income, or underrepresented, they're not going to see themselves in the other people in STEM fields, right? So it's important that they can find someone that they can connect with and explore that sort of identity-based mentorship in that capacity, and they can find a lot of support through that. So what I really wanted to start off with here is have a bit of a conversation about your experiences with mentorship, both good and bad. What have you learned from your mentee? What have you learned from a mentor? And this can come from, either side. This can be either you as a mentee being mentored, how did that feel? Or you mentoring someone else. But I would love it if some folks could share some experiences with mentorship. maybe I can start. I have perhaps my best mentorship experience ever happened a couple of years ago, right before I got into graduate school. I got my undergrad degree here at CU as well. And when I was taking a gap year, trying to figure out what to do and trying to figure out what graduate school was, a professor of one of my graduate level classes, one of the requirements for this class was to actually give a presentation about a journal article. And I gave this presentation. I was really proud of this presentation, but immediately afterwards, this professor who had essentially been mentoring me for a while about graduate school, he came up and he just put his hands on the table and he said, "You have to go to graduate school." And that's basically why I'm here now. So these are the kinds of like high impact mentorship experiences that really stick with you and can really make a difference.
Dana, I had a similar situation in that I was at UC San Diego and I had just started an integrated bachelor's master's program. And a professor just in passing one day said to me, you should do a PhD. And no one had ever said that to me before. And it literally had never crossed my mind, even though my husband was doing a PhD at the time. And that was, those little conversations are what can help open your mind to things sometimes.
Absolutely.
Just something that comes to mind for me, and I'm like trying to be mindful about it too, is how my mentors in the past, like how they speak sometimes can make a difference for how much I trust talking to them. Like, because sometimes like I feel like they don't mean to be dismissive, but they come off dismissive. And then I've noticed like some mentors, like the way, just how they can change their language just a bit, and it comes off like, it just like kind of fosters more trust. So that's like something I want to learn more of, those type of like how to like, just how to communicate better as a mentor.
Thank you.
So when I was growing up, I was very interested in hurricanes, and I grew up down in Miami. And I was lucky enough that when I was 8 years old, someone who worked at the Hurricane Research Division ended up moving across the street from where my parents lived. And that started a really, fantastic mentor-mentee relationship that continues to this day. I did a Noah Hollings undergraduate research internship with him. His name's Joe Cione. Ended up doing a postdoc with him, and even though I'm not working directly with him today, we still correspond quite regularly. And my current job is working in hurricanes, so all those experiences were really important.
That is so awesome. I love that.
Thank you for sharing.
Yes, and thank you for those of you who shared in the chat. So what I really liked about all of your stories is that it became really clear that mentors are not just here to make a mini version of themselves. When you are mentored in a good way, you not only get that professional piece of the network and the career guidance and collaboration, but then beyond that, you get a sense of belonging and a sense of feeling driven to be where you are and take the next step. And a sense of empowerment as well. You feel confidence in taking next steps in your career and in your science and in your work. And so it goes beyond just sort of teaching you how to do the job. And this is why I think it's so interesting when you see a lot of professional spaces, when they see that people are struggling with belonging or people are struggling with integrating into the space, they always throw a mentorship program at it. And the reason why my language here is so dismissive is because mentorship is kind of treated like a Band-Aid for a lot of situations. And indeed, good mentorship can make a huge difference, as you all just verbalized. But bad mentorship, studies have shown, can actually cause more harm than good mentorship could bring benefit. So it's really important that when we mentor, we're not mentoring to superficially, performatively address a problem, that we're doing so to actually change something. So when you look at how academia in particular is structured, it's a very the power to decide whether or not a student advances is very much with one person or with very few people. And this person is usually the mentor, right? And so it can be troublesome because if that person doesn't see you as a scientist, you don't get to advance. So there's a lot of code switching from the space of the student in order to sort of perform well enough so that their mentor can see them as a scientist. And so that's why I think it's important to sort of look at mentorship rather than sort of hierarchically deciding who gets to advance and who doesn't, sort of making people fit and change and adapt to the mold that already exists. It's really important to sort of look at this more as a collaboration. So before we really dig into this, I wanted to throw it back to Beck briefly, just to sort of offer some thoughts to keep in mind as we go through this theory bit.
Yeah, totally. We know research shows that mentors are one of the most effective things that we can bring to our professional lives and to our students. We know that a great mentor can really do all of the things that Dana has just talked about, not just the science guidance and the confidence building and the introductions, but to really connect you into a place and help you feel like you belong, teach you the unspoken rules, help you get through that, and open doors. And I challenge you to think about what you also get out of mentoring. So the best mentoring relationships are not, as Dana said, one person coming from a higher place, imparting their wisdom and knowledge and molding the next generation, but ones where the mentors are also getting something out of it. And you might come into it from the space of just wanting to give back. Maybe you had a mentor yourself who was really fantastic and you want to give back. You might need some energy and vitality in the work that you're doing every day, like just talking to a new student or an undergrad or a graduate student or somebody else in your institution who is not a specialist in your field may impart new ideas and new wisdom. So totally encourage you to think about what you can get from them. And if you'd like to throw in the chat why you're mentoring and what you're hoping to get out of mentoring relationships, please do. But I will bring Dana back in to talk about this concept of breaking down the hierarchical mentoring structure and thinking about your mentoring relationship as two-way.
So this is the theory portion of the presentation. I'm going to talk to you sort of about, essentially, there's two different types of mentorship. There's many variations and subgroups within them, but if you ask someone who specializes in teaching and working with mentorship, there's basically peer mentorship and there's hierarchical mentorship. And as the names imply, peer mentorship involves two people who are at the same or very similar level, and then hierarchical mentorship implies that there is a power or experience difference that sort of separates them. And so what I want to do is go through these relationships and evaluate several different areas of them. For example, this first one about what problem solving looks like in these two different types of relationships. And this is by no means an exhaustive list, but what I really want to do is get you to start training your nuance muscle so you can get a feel for what mentorship should look like and how it can really empower and uplift students and give them agency to take steps on their own. So to kick things off, I wanted to talk a little bit about problem solving. When you see two students working together on a similar problem, they both have equal stakes in the game. If they decide to take a certain approach, that means both of them have to work towards that approach. And if they decide to change the plan halfway through, that means more work for both of them. But when you see hierarchical mentorship, it's usually someone sitting behind a desk telling you what the next step is. And so what I wanted to do is include this video. This is a 1-minute long TikTok made by this professor, Rachelbrenner, who is essentially satirizing the advisor-advisee relationship in a PhD.
To continue working on that research paper.
Can you hear it?
Where do we leave off? I know we just met last week and had a very detailed conversation about this project, but as your advisor, I forgot about 95% of that discussion. And I'm slowly learning to not internalize that as a form of personal rejection. Looking at the analyses now, I see we ran analysis A, but I think we should have done analysis B instead. Okay, but I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes trying to remind you how we had this conversation last week and you decided that analysis A was the better choice. And then I'm going to disregard all of that and say we run analysis B over the weekend anyway. You say we, but you really mean me. You got me there, but don't worry, I will vastly underestimate how long it will take for you to put in this extra work and reassure you that it'll just take a few minutes. And after I put all that extra effort in, you're gonna remember why option A was better. That's probably accurate. It probably is. Well, good luck on that analysis that I'm gonna change my mind on again. I'll see you next week. See you next week. I'm gonna forget this conversation as soon as you walk out the door.
So this is one of my favorite videos. Rachelbrenner is a professor at CSU of counseling psychology, and she went viral because of this video. Myself and PhD students around the world were sharing this video with each other and laughing about how real it is, how we've totally felt this way, whether our advisor is phenomenal or whether they're very hands-off, or, you know, whatever it may be, we've all had an experience like this where it just felt very skewed and we didn't feel heard. And the funny thing about that is after this video went viral, Twitter flagged it for sensitive content, which means it bothered someone, which I think was very interesting. But the reason why I wanted to show this, I know this is about undergraduate mentorship and research, but the real important piece of this is that if you just tell your student what to do in the lab all the time, they don't get to learn how to problem solve, how to look at results and decide what the next step is. So yes, there is the issue of not quite feeling heard, but on top of that, you know, this is an educational process. So students need to learn how to do this and they need your guidance. And so they need you to collaborate and work with them and treat the situation as if you are their peer. You have equal stakes in sort of shifting research midway or changing from analysis A to analysis B. It's not just, you know, the student doing all of the work. It shouldn't be, rather. So this is sort of the first thing I wanted to touch on. Can you advance the slide for me, Beck? Perfect. So I wanted to shift gears a little bit and talk about code switching. And I touched on this a little bit, but essentially code switching is when you change your behavior or your appearance to present a certain way, the way you are expected to present. And so we code switch all the time in professional spaces in academia. For example, using a virtual background is an example of code switching. You may have a professional top on, but then maybe you're wearing running shorts, right? So that you can hop on your Peloton in between meetings or something like that. And this is totally normal. This is totally fine. People do this all the time. People will put their desks in places that don't make sense in their house spatially because the lighting is better, because the background looks better for Zoom meetings, right? So it's interesting to sort of look at these situations. And one additional aspect of code switching that I'm sure you've all thought about is that of clothing. So I've included another video here, another TikTok. This girl is speaking about how she really likes to make her outfits when she goes to work in her office. She likes to make her outfits fun and likes to sort of deviate from the norm. So I'll let her speak, and this one doesn't have subtitles, so I'll give a quick summary of the video at the end.
So here's a rant that nobody asked for. So I do this thing where I make business casual outfits fun. And sometimes people don't believe in my vision and must show that they don't believe in my vision. And I don't know why it bothers me so much today, but it does. And all I can say is that dress codes are inherently sexist. If you don't believe me, first think about how long cis white men dominated the workforce. Now think about casual settings. Who is closer to business casual attire, Chad at a frat party, or Allison, who's getting nice drinks with friends? And I would objectively say that Allison spent more time to look presentable. So when you put my outfit in check, I feel like you're just reinforcing the idea that femme bodies must be penalized for looking beautiful or fashionable in the workplace. When really they're being compared with how much do they look like Chad in slacks and a polo. Like, it's not my fault that Chad has no fashion sense.
So I love this video because it really summarizes what it is like to dress professionally as a woman. And so I've included some pictures here, but you can see that on the left, business professional for men and business professional for women, they look nearly identical. female outfits in the professional world are basically just, you know, masculine outfits that are just cinched a little bit more. They have a slightly different fit, but essentially it's all blazers and slacks. But then if you look at what casual outfits look like, men could walk right into the office and no one would know. It looks very similar. They're already very close to professional attire, whereas women are criticized for what they're wearing. It's not professional. And this goes even further when you look at things like hair, right? And how what is decided to be professional really has a lot to do with these sort of normalized light-skinned bodies with straight hair, and this can be a big problem. So the reason why I bring all of this up is because professionalism in the workspace is one of the biggest barriers to vulnerability in professional spaces. And I think this is really important because this contributes a lot to imposter syndrome, right? When you can't be vulnerable in the workspace, you have to present a certain way, right? And you can't bring your whole self into every interaction. You don't talk about failures. You have to keep this image up all the time. And so my whole point with this is that when you look at mentorship relationships, I really encourage you to code switch back to where your students are. So you may not realize this, but students are constantly code switching up to your level. They are performing professionalism so that they can sort of fake it till they make it in the professional space. And I encourage you to sort of change that, right? Go back and meet them halfway. And this is one way that your student can be more comfortable with you. And then they're not taking as much effort and brain space to figure out how to present to you so that you consider them professional. So one of my favorite examples of this actually was when I gave a workshop about how to make a scientific poster. And I was explaining to students how to use images and shapes on your poster to sort of guide the eye across the page. And I brought up the example of manga and comic books. And I shared with the workshop that I'm really into anime and manga and comic books. And it was really cool to see the excitement on every student's face when they realized that they had that connection with me and that I wasn't this lofty professional person who didn't also, you know, watch cartoons, for example. So breaking down barriers like this, it can be quite simple and you may think it doesn't have a lot to do with work, but it actually makes a huge difference in mentorship connections. Cool. So I wanted to talk about enthusiasm in the mentorship relationship. So when you look at two students working together, they both want to be there. They both are excited and they have already a lot of connection that goes beyond just the work that they're going to do. And that sort of supports that connection. But then you look at hierarchical mentorship and there's this sense of responsibility. I'm here because it's my job. I'm here to help you actualize your career because that's what you're supposed to do. It's all about accelerating your research and your notoriety. And this is how it starts to feel one-sided. So I really love this comic where a professor is sitting at his desk thinking, I need data. He goes out, fetches a graduate student, says, quick, show me data. He stares at it and he's satisfied and then he just leaves. And the student sits there like terrified after this interaction. And very aptly, this is described as drive-by mentoring. I actually think I saw someone give PhDcomics.com a shout out in the chat. So yes, I love it. So what I really like about this comic is that it really captures what that one-sided mentorship looks like. The student didn't get anything out of it. In fact, the student lost. The student has, he's trembling, he has anxiety now, he's uncomfortable engaging with his professor. Whereas if that student were, speaking with a lab mate, perhaps that relationship would be a lot more relaxed. So I encourage you to look at this and think about why you're here, right? Why do you want to mentor? Why do you want to have a connection with students? Is it to make your research look better, or is it to empower that student, right? So I think there really needs to be this sort of culture shift, particularly in academic spaces, that you're not bringing in undergrads to make your research go faster. It's pretty unlikely that an undergraduate is going to make the big difference in your work. So it's important to work with them so that they can get to that point. They can get the training that they need. And then at the same time, you learn things from your undergrad. One of the coolest things that I learned from an undergrad actually was when we couldn't get a polymer out of a 3D printed mold. And he said, well, why don't you just spray some PAM in there? And it worked. And we still do that. So having these really creative ideas is really interesting in this space. And it's important to make room for that. This might be my favorite slide in the whole presentation, y'all. So I do not consider myself an engineer. I am an artist who found a canvas in engineering. And this is one of my most recent pieces that I'm particularly proud of. But you can see that I really like color and I really like, popping visuals. And you can see this a lot in my research as well. So basically all of my research has to do with the color assays and the crystal violets and the glowing quantum dots. And I love that. So yes, superficially, I do take a lot of pride in the aesthetics of my research, but on top of that, I do my science like an artist. So when you draw something, if you focus on one detail too much, everything around it's going to be out of proportion. So you have to sketch the whole thing and approximate where things are going to go before you go in and do details. And I do a really similar approach with my research as well. And the important thing about this is that my identity is attached to my being an artist. And that can't be taken away because I didn't pass a prelim or if my professor is upset with me. And that's really valuable because by tying that to my being an engineer, I will never not be an engineer because I will always be an artist. And engineering is just a canvas for that. So the reason why I bring this up is because when you look at peer connections, they really encourage creativity. Anything goes, right? But when you look at hierarchical mentorship, it has a lot more with the status quo. And sort of this passing down of power and prestige. So if you like all of this theory that I'm rambling about, I highly encourage you to check out the author Paulo Freire. He wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which is an entire book that breaks down how we can use education to empower and liberate ourselves. And essentially, what he writes is that if we look at students as vessels that should be filled with knowledge, then students start to see the world as unchanging, something that they have to adapt to. But if we teach students with open-ended questions and we encourage creativity, then students realize that they have agency and that they can change the world around them, which is ultimately what we want from the scientists that are going to be solving all of our challenges in future generations. So I think that's what Freire is getting at when he writes, there's no such thing as neutral education. Education either empowers or it just maintains the status quo. So I think it's really important to sort of ask these open-ended questions. Let students be creative. Let them suggest something that is totally, out of the box. Cool. And I have one more example for you all, and that is looking at mentorship as a form of connection versus as a form of control. So I see a lot of bad mentorship happen, and it comes out a lot when mentors want to just make a mini version of themselves out of their mentee, and their only drive is just to accelerate their research, gain notoriety. And in doing so, they have to sort of micromanage what their students are doing so that they are constantly working towards their personal goals. And so you can see there's a lot of, interlaced concepts in all of this, that this has a lot to do with sort of limiting that student's agency, limiting their creativity. And the real issue with this is that it doesn't allow for a sense of belonging, which, if you remember from the beginning, is one of the big reasons why we mentor in the first place. So when you're really connecting with students, you're finding that that student is able to find their own identity in that. And they're able to bring that to the workplace because they're sharing that with you, and then you in your position of power are able to empower that student. So I think it's really important to sort of look at this from a place of connection rather than looking at it as a way of sort of expanding your team and just gaining from these sorts of relationships. So at one point, I had been working with a professor, and this professor sort of frowned down upon my getting involved with a lot of activism on campus. So I had never told her a lot of the information, a lot of the details surrounding this. And then at one point I went to a protest for the first Latina professor's tenure. She was denied tenure. I went to a protest, I spoke at this protest, and I wound up in the Daily Camera as I do. And this professor that I was working with saw that. and she was facing a big tenure decision as well, and she was really struggling in the department, and she asked for me to help her. And so this is why I speak about looking at mentorship as this connection, right? If she had known that, we could have worked together beyond the capacity of just our research. So in this way, I really encourage you to chat with your students about what they do that isn't research, and actually, you know, take note of it, and really learn about their lives, and go to their events. If the student is putting on a social event, you should swing by and see what they're like outside of the research context. So all of these tips and theories are very helpful, and they're really nice. But how do you actually make this tangible? So I'm going to pass it back to Beck to give you all actionable steps about how to make all of this happen.
Thanks, Dana. I think we, sorry, Dana, I should have passed the slide on. There's a summary of what Dana's been talking about. For many of us, we're working really hard to try and diversify science. We know that having new voices at the table, people with lots of different experiences, makes our science better. And I think what Dana is talking about here is really important as we think about how we make sure that those voices are heard in a genuine way. Are we just creating a space for people who might look different to fit into the box that we already have? Or are we actually genuinely making space for them to bring their whole selves to the table? And so I think that there's all sorts of things that go into this. Obviously, you're going to have some aspects of hierarchical mentoring when you first start out with an undergraduate. We do still have to teach them how to do science. But if you can bring this concept of the learning curve being a shared journey and a lot of opportunities for your mentee to teach you in all sorts of different ways, then I think that relationship can be so much stronger. And all that Dana has shared with us will help us be much more inclusive and create much more belonging in our mentoring relationships. A question for you. Feel free to unmute and answer the question. How do you know that you've got a great mentoring relationship? How will it feel to you?
Sometimes it's external validation. It's the student comes in at the start of the project and feels good. And when the project's over, they're just as excited, if not more excited about the project.
I think that's great. If your mentees can walk out of the experience of doing research with you feeling more empowered and more excited to stay in the field, you've done something really right.
Sometimes they don't.
Sometimes it's a win too. I think we have to be careful not to discount the fact that if your undergraduate realizes that they don't want to do science for the rest of their lives as an undergraduate, you've just saved them from something that they may not have liked. So yeah, that's not necessarily a downside.
I mean, this is one of the questions I wanted to raise. I don't know if now is the appropriate time, but you know, I've done quite a bit of mentoring through time, and I've had students who they come in, they're enthusiastic, and after a week they realize that the work is really hard, and they close themselves down. And you try to get, you know, enthusiastic conversations going with them again and find out what's going on. But sometimes you know, it just, as I said, I've had good experiences and bad experiences, and a lot of it has the fulcrum has been the students' enthusiasm. How do we fix that? Or how do we, is it just something we have to deal with?
I think there's real value in acknowledging that our education up to the point that we hit research is externally evaluated. You know, you do exams, you do tests, you get graded, and that there's a known answer for everything. So the students who are most successful up to the point of hitting research are often the ones who are least prepared to stand up to real research, where half the time things don't go the way that you plan, and that you've got to often not follow the linear path that our journal articles lead you to believe everybody else does, but that actually research is a sort of iterative process. And I think talking honestly about that helps a little bit.
I think that's exactly, I mean, that's exactly one of the right things is, you know, it's research. I don't know the answer. that's why we're working on this. And I'm glad to have you as part of the team, and that hopefully we can work together and do it. But as I said, sometimes it's been to great success and sometimes it's been kind of,
When I was a grad student, I had a quote on my wall: research is what you're doing when you don't know what you're doing. That's Werner von Braun. Anybody else want to share? I think Anna put in the chat there that you know how it feels when you have a great relationship, when students ask questions that make them seem vulnerable, but they trust enough that they can ask those questions. I totally second that, Anna. So I know some of you are starting out with mentoring for undergraduates this summer. And so I'm going to give you just some tools. These are a little bit more practical and a little bit less relationship focused. When you think about how you might define your project, and this one is going to have a really big difference depending on whether you're mentoring an undergrad or a graduate student and if you're time limited. But a great undergraduate project, assuming that you're going to be working just for the summer, is one that is appropriately scoped for that program time frame. And that's a challenging thing to do. But what we found as a good kind of rule of thumb is that if you as an experienced researcher can do it in a week, that's probably about right for an undergraduate through the summer. But that it feels meaningful. And part of the way that you can help empower your students is perhaps give them some choices in what their project might look like. So you may have a general scope and maybe a couple of ideas up your sleeve, and you can let them dig a little bit into it and see which ones are exciting. Really encourage you to think about whether your project has some sort of early success. I think that many of us entered research by being handed a whole lot of academic papers and being told to go study the literature and then come back and work on a plot or a project. And that's a really hard way to get excited about research. So if there's a way that you can engage them so that they have an early success, maybe making their first plot, that helps a lot. And the other thing that's really challenging is knowing exactly how far they're going to get in a summer. So if you can have some off-ramps and on-ramps for continuing the project if your student gets further, or cutting it short if necessary, so that nobody, yourself included, is panicking whether or not they get to the end of a project through the summer. That's really helpful as well. That's one of the things that you do have if you're teaching a lab. You know exactly that that lab is doable within that time. And the reality of real research is sometimes things don't work. And the students learning that is really important, but also explaining to them in the process that it's okay. You know, the process of doing undergraduate research is much more about learning than it is about results. But the reality of real research also is that sometimes things don't go quite the way we want. I don't think I need to tell any of the people in this room that the aim of an undergraduate research project is to do authentic research. You don't want to be just tasking them with jobs that you don't want to be doing if you want to have a meaningful undergraduate experience. So giving the student the chance to feel empowered, feel ownership of the project is really helpful. I encourage you to consider your support network. We're going to come back to this idea again later, but one person should never be the only person that has a say in your career, right? We should think about that as a defining feature of mentorship, is not just being the only person for them, but to connect them with a support network and encourage them to create their own support network. So if you're mentoring a student over the summer, think about whether there's somebody else that you can connect them with in your group, maybe a student who can help with coding, or maybe there's somebody who's really great at making posters in your group. Maybe they're part of an REU program where this is being provided, like Rex. Maybe they're not. I know that we have a lot of undergrad students who are at NOAA and CU over the summer who aren't connected to a program. But if you can connect them to other people as well, that helps them to feel empowered, feel like they're not bothering one person all the time. Maybe make connections that they cannot make with you, with somebody else, but also to relieve some of the work for you. And I think that's really particularly important if you're taking some well-deserved time off during the summer, that you've left somebody that they can ask if they run into trouble. The first week matters. I know some of you are mentoring remotely this year, some of you are mentoring in person, but think intentionally about the first experiences they have. Is that first experience going to be positive? Are you going to be able to show them where they're going to work on their first morning? Is somebody going to meet them and show them around, have lunch with them? Remembering that those students especially tend to be very intimidated. A lot of them suffer imposter syndrome and wonder whether they actually deserve to be there and came through this process and got a position because they're actually capable, or whether they just somehow slipped through the process and somebody's going to find out that that's not true. So the more that you can help them that they belong and have things prepared so that that first week is smooth and welcoming, the better. And on that note, I really encourage you to share your enthusiasm for your science. Why are you excited about doing this? What relevance does it have to the real world? If you can strengthen your introduction to the research that you're doing with photos, videos, YouTube, public interest news stories, and not just a whole lot of dry academic material, that helps them to feel engaged. Really encourage you to share your own enthusiasm for the research that you're doing. But it's also appropriate to talk about the challenges, as we were just talking about. Mike, the experience is really different to be doing research than it is to be doing lab work. So talking about that piece of it as part of the introduction to research is really helpful too. Dana talked a lot about vulnerability and being human when it really comes down to it as being a mentor. So you're in a great position to connect with your students early on. And you can share who you are as a human if you're willing to do that. Talk to them about your kids, your pets, the things that you like to do in the weekend. I always say to our mentors, just be a little bit cautious as they're first getting to know you and doing a lot of code switching about what you ask them. Ideally, they share a little bit about what excites and motivates them and what's going on in their background, but you don't want to necessarily come across as prying. So maybe your first questions are future looking, aspirational. What got you interested in science? What are you excited about doing? What matters or motivates you? Why are you interested in doing research? Why are you interested in studying physics? And are there any particular skills that you really want to learn this summer? So that can open possibilities for creating connections. I think it's also really helpful to discuss what you expect out of that mentoring relationship. Why are you going to mentor? What do you expect to get out of it? What are your expectations for the project? What are your expectations for the relationship? And I'm going to just introduce 3 concepts here. I'm going to give you send you all some handouts with these documents as examples. I've just got to shrink my chat here so that I can see what I have on my screen. But the first one I want to introduce is the concept of a mentoring agreement. And what this gives you is some boundaries. I think especially right now where we're all working in strange hours at home, have things going on in the background, you can talk about how often you expect to meet, when you're not going to be available, when you are going to be available. What would you like to talk about? Are there things that you don't want to talk about? Maybe talking about your kids is off limits to you. Maybe your student doesn't want to think about where they're going to be 10 years out from now, because right now survival is immediate. But also, how are you going to meet? Are you going to meet on Teams? Are you going to talk on Slack? Are you going to call on the phone? Are you going to meet on Zoom? Who's going to schedule those meetings? Personally, I like to encourage my mentees to send me an email that they want to meet, tell me what they want to meet about and what they've already tried, so that you don't just get I'm stuck, but I'm working on this problem and these are the things that I've tried. Can we talk about this? It was a great piece of advice from one of my own mentors, and I've carried it through a lot when I reach out to people. Having some sort of formal agreement does give you a fallback also if problems arise. You can come back and say, remember how you said at the beginning that we were going to respond to an email within 24 hours? I've noticed you're not responding to me again. Let's make sure everything's going well. So I'll share some of these examples with you. Communication plan, again, it will give you a chance to share how you like to communicate, set some expectations. You may also like to ask questions about how would you like to receive feedback or criticism? How do you like to be appreciated or thanked? Some students love or some of us love to be appreciated in public. Some of you cringe if somebody says something nice about you in public. So just finding out how students like to communicate. And I think that for some of us who are getting a little bit older now, we realize that Gen Z may be much more comfortable with sending a quick text than to pick up the phone. And it's okay to say, like, I really do want to talk to you on the phone. I think it's an important business skill. Or I do all of my business by email. And to me, that means full sentences, a salutation at the beginning and a signature at the end. Or I'm quite okay with you texting me on my personal cell phone, whatever works for you. So just talking about what makes sense. And the work plan is a little bit of a tool for supporting research progress. So you can talk through with your student and help plan what your expectations might be for the next week, where you're hoping your research is going to get to by middle of the summer, by the end of the summer. Or maybe there's some places where there's specific options. Like if we get this far, then we're just going to make the poster. If we get this far in the first 2 weeks, then we're going to go this route. We're going to try this here and this might work. And if it works, we can keep going. If it doesn't work, then we can change the plan. It also helps to talk about when you might not be available. So if you're going to be away for a week or whatever through the course of the summer, what different things are they going to be working on during that time, and who can they go to for contact, for help and extra contact. And often if you're working within an REU program, you're going to have some deliverables along the way that are presented by the program. But if you're working independently with a student, you can think about what the final deliverables might be. You're going to aim to get a poster or a presentation at the end of the summer. Are we going to have a check-in midway through? Finally, just touching a little bit on guiding the research. Remember, these are brand new researchers, no matter how much life experience they have. And so they don't necessarily know all the things that you've accumulated over all your years of work in this field. So where you can think out loud, really encourage you to do that. Oh, I'm thinking this process through. Maybe this would be a good option, but now that I think about it, that doesn't work so well. If I was going to try that, I might start off by investigating this and then do this. Ask questions that encourage diving deeper. Why did you do that? What might be some options about how you might handle that? What have you tried? Check in frequently, really at least a couple of times a week for an undergrad working through the summer. If you can check in briefly each day, even if it's just a quick how you're doing. Reminding them that your door is always open if that's the policy that you've made, or I'd like you to schedule a meeting before 3 o'clock because at 3 o'clock I'm out working with picking my kids up, whatever that might be. But just remind them how that they should reach out and what they should try before they reach out necessarily, and how provide frequent feedback. Again, undergrads are very used to being graded and giving feedback a lot. The idea that you would not get any feedback until you turned in a completed manuscript is very scary. So the more that you can share what you're noticing in a kind, supportive, encouraging way, the better. I've got a lot of very experienced mentors in this room. I know I've worked with some of you for years. What strategies have you found that have been really helpful guiding research? Especially for those of you who've been mentoring in a remote space over the last year, is there anything extra that's come up? One example I've had shared is if you're showing a student how to do something on Zoom or on a video call, have the student themselves drive the work. That's a way of helping them to see how you might navigate between folders or whatever else in a more meaningful way than just telling them how to do it so that they remember. See, Hazel said she's been using Google Jamboard for virtual whiteboarding. I love the Google Jamboard platform, as I think you know, Hazel.
Well, although you said you don't want us to just hand a pile of academic papers to a student at the beginning of the summer, reading those kinds of papers at some point is important. And one thing that I do is have always arrange for a very small group of me and a couple other students to read through a paper, and maybe we'll read 3 papers and each one of us presents the paper to the other 2, which gets them more deeply involved.
I love that. And yes, I definitely didn't mean to say that you should not introduce them to the academic literature. It's a required skill if you're going to do research. But you're right, talking them through the process is really helpful, and working together on how you understand it helps them to see what a experienced scientist looks for in a paper, which is quite different from what a new and emerging researcher might look for. Oh, Slack and Teams for asynchronous conversation and problem solving. I agree completely. It's a great platform if you're working remotely. All right.
I hadn't heard of Google Jamboard. That looks great. Slack, it depends how many Slack channels you have. Let's just put it like that.
Yep, I admit that I'm not very good on Slack, but sending text back and forth, especially if you're working on something collaboratively in some shape or form, can be really, really effective. I do want to encourage you to support yourself as well as your student. I think especially right now, our personal and our professional lives are really entwined. So be honest about the challenges of COVID, what you might be dealing with at home. Encourage them to reach out if they need anything. Check in often, make sure that the progress is being made. Sometimes no contact is not a good sign. Them saying everything's fine may not actually mean that. So just keeping compared, and be prepared for somebody to get sick. Maybe you do need to have a week that doesn't work because somebody's not doing very well. Definitely practice self-care as well as encourage them to take care of it. Set boundaries. You don't have to be available to your students 24 hours a day. It's completely appropriate to say, I can only meet on Monday, Tuesday, and Friday, and that the end of my workday is 5 p.m. Found it really interesting to think about this optimal learning zone concept. We don't do a lot of learning in our comfort zone. And for a student who's learning how to be a researcher, they're most definitely into this learning zone where you're being pushed outside of the comfort zone. And your point of maximum learning is really close to the point where you turn over into panic. And you'll see that a lot with students, that sometimes they are really panicking and really questioning their ability. It's not very healthy for us to sit in the panic zone all the time, but we also don't want to push them right down into their comfort zone. Learning and growing as a scientist is really about being stretched a little bit. And learning and growing as a mentor is also about being pushed just a little bit outside of your comfort zone. So supporting your students, you can totally make opportunities for them. If you're having a group meeting, invite them to join, tell them what's expected, encourage them to speak up, encourage them to present in your group or at conferences. Encourage them to go to grad school if you think they're going to be great at it and that they're showing interest in it. Introduce them to potential collaborators and advisors. This is especially true if they're more senior students who may be thinking about grad school. If you can plug them into the people that you know who might be doing really exciting work that aligns with their interests, it's super helpful. And you can advocate for them behind the scenes, be a sponsor. We can also recognize the challenges that our students are going through. For some students, there are microaggressions, biases, harassment that are going on either in whatever parts of their lives, hopefully not within your mentoring relationships. And if you feel like you need help with any of that, please do reach out. Some of them are struggling with imposter syndrome and whether they're there. Many of our students right now are working as well as doing school. They're trying to support families. They're helping with younger siblings and others in their family. They're also struggling with the reality of having done classwork online for a year. They may have challenges with exams and time management. And I think all of us at different turning points and towards the end of your undergraduate degree, there's definitely one of those where you have some big questions about the future. So there are a lot of things that may be going on. That said, you don't have to be Yoda or Lucy. You don't have to be all-knowing and all welcoming. So really encourage your students to get support, not just from you, but from their friends, from their community. Professional help, you can provide resources. Many of our students are students themselves and have access to resources through their campuses. Our employees have lots of resources that are available to them as well. And broaden their circles. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the mentor map that Earth Science Women's Network and others have really encouraged, encourage your students to think about all of the people who feed into their mentoring network. So not just you might be the mentor who's providing professional development and sponsorship, maybe some intellectual community, but the emotional support might come from a parent or a clergy person. Who are the role models that they look up to? Who are the people that hold them accountable for what really matters? And ideally, each of us has a number of mentors who provide support in lots of different ways. And you don't necessarily want the person that you rant about about your PhD advisor to be that PhD advisor, for instance. Having different people in those roles is all really helpful. And if you're not familiar with the mentor maps, you can search them for Earth Science Women's Network, and you can actually do an activity with your students if you choose to, where they help identify who that can be. And most importantly, I think just have fun. Remember that this is a life-changing opportunity for your students, but also something that is going to be meaningful for you, hopefully. So practice kindness, conscious kindness, and enjoy working with your students.